Live here with Firstbeat, John Lally and Tom George joining us from Copenhagen, Denmark. Is that right, Tom?
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah, just visiting an old Princeton mate. So yeah.
Outstanding. But training data as it's lifted Tom's performance in these very interesting months. The title "Training Daze" is essentially just exactly what it appears to be in this quagmire that we've all found ourselves in. Thanks to this coronavirus, if you will, things have shifted. And what we want to do is focus on during that shift or during that paradigm change, how it's affected Tom in his rowing. So a little background, John Lally, as I said, I've worked closely with Firstbeat Technologies since 2006. I've monitored teams from the LA Lakers to the US men's national team. And here are some images presenting, you'll find me presenting the heart rate variability summit in 2019 in Helsinki with my good friend and colleague, Veli-Pekka Kurunmäki at UCLA football. We've done a lot with UCLA football over the last 3 years, Sports Biometrics Conference. And of course, like so many of you out there, doing the sports I love and doing the training that I love here in the right image. And this story really begins 5 years ago when I met Tom at Princeton. Tom was at that time stroking the heavyweight 8 at Princeton. Greg Hughes and the Princeton Heavies had just implemented Firstbeat to monitor their team and to understand training loads. And it was actually a really great story. Veli-Pekka and I were presenting to a bunch of coaches at Princeton, and we were late to the presentation and run into Tom outside a little cafe right on the edge of campus. And, perfect, unbelievable coincidence. We're like, do you know where this gym is? Can you help us get there in time for this presentation? He's like, sure, come on. So we jog across campus with Tom, and the whole way back and forth, we're discussing heart rate data, training effect, Firstbeat, what he learns from it, how it elevates his understanding of his physiology and his training. So that was, at that point, I knew right there, I was going to be talking to and become friends with Tom for a long time. And sure enough, here we are 5 years later. And our dialogue in these last 5 months has been absolutely epic for me. Tom, what do you remember about about training at Princeton, specifically as it pertains to Firstbeat and heart rate data?
Yeah, obviously, I'd never really used like a Firstbeat system or like a heart rate system in the way that Firstbeat presents it. And I think what was really cool was that you had the whole team was on it, and you were able to compare between individual athletes and then also in the longer term over many sessions, and look at how people improve and how different parts of the program were working well for different athletes and different people. And obviously every day you get sent like a report that we're going to look at later, obviously, and those reports really allowed you to, as an individual, to understand where you can maybe improve and where you can maybe back off or sort of step in a bit more. And in that regard, I think that Firstbeat provides that data to you as an individual, and also sort of on a more macro level to the team, to be able to create better performances. And I think obviously in the States, you have on the East Coast especially, you have a long period of time off the water where you're indoors on the erg. And so in that regard, much like I guess how it's all been over the last few months, you're able to just every day keep ticking up that data and using it and being able to track those trends really well. I think at Princeton, we saw a lot of guys PR on their erg tests by quite a lot, and I think there's no doubt that in part that was due to being able to analyze that data that you're getting from erg sessions.
Oh, very cool, very cool. Well, one thing that you said there that's been sort of buzzing in my mind for the last months, and as we prepared for this webinar, is it seems to me like you're the type of athlete, the type of person that has great attention to detail. Would you agree with that? And is that what allows you to sort of utilize that information and also to go after it, to want to dial in on the finer points of what you're doing, how you're feeling? Does that resonate with you?
Oh, definitely. I think in particular during the lockdown and using the QRT that we're going to talk about later, that's the sort of thing I think that I started to incorporate more and more throughout this period. And that's like a little detail that takes very little time out of your day, but actually can provide you with quite a lot of insight into like how into your training. And obviously, like, not how your training is going to go. I wouldn't say that your like recovery score necessarily dictates how your training is going to go, but it sort of gives you the idea of, oh, actually yesterday was pretty hard, or this last like 10 days has been pretty hard for me, or on my body, and my body is really starting to show that in those little things. I think also just really enjoy on the dashboard the way that you can you get like the graphs plotted for you, so you can have those little details, and you can continue to look at them and see how, as I said earlier, like look at how you can make little changes that can actually translate into quite big changes once you're like implementing them over quite a long period of time.
100%. Let's try to roll through a few slides, but really quickly, just tell us, this was meant to be a little bit of a joke. The previous slide has, the life of somebody who works with a company and delivers talks and sales and conferences, and then a lot of training as well. But tell us, this is, the juxtaposition here is Tom George is rowing. Here you are with your mates in the 8 after a big race, I presume. Tom George is rowing outside his. You can tell us where this is, and then a little bit of cycling. So rowing, and actually a lot of cycling. Is that
Yeah.
fair? Is that a fair summary of your days?
Yeah, I think probably, yeah. Like a lot of over the lockdown in particular, we were sort of encouraged to and sort of allowed to take a bit of time to implement and sort of add in cycling or cross training to some extent.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of the guys took cycling on as an opportunity to do something a bit different and to keep it a bit fresh. Obviously, 5 months training in that shed that you can see there is a long time and gets quite hard. It gets quite hard. So being able to get out on the roads and just like try something a bit different, and it has been awesome. I think that's something that I've really enjoyed implementing into my training, and I'd love to be able to like keep in there in to some extent. And I think the big thing is just, firstly, when you go for a ride, it's like time under duress is big. Even if you're not necessarily pushing it all the time, just having that time in that, even in the UT3 zone, like this sort of T3 zone is big and obviously contributes to it. But then also, obviously, when you're out on the bike, it's never just flat. So you're not just sitting in one heart rate zone, you're sort of transversing through the planes. And in doing so, you're able to, in doing so, you're able to really like tap into different energy systems. And so, like we'll see later, your training effect is actually very high off the back of the bike ride. And like time in anaerobic is very high, which is quite interesting. And I'm sort of keen to find out more as I do it more often to see like how that benefits my training.
Excellent. Let's get to some of that data that you're alluding to there really quickly. But I spoke about Princeton. You rode there for 4 years. Were you there for all 4 years?
Yeah.
Okay. And you were stroke seat of the men's 8, of course. And what was your best result at Princeton? You guys at IRAs, were you third?
Third at IRAs, yeah.
Okay. And then what I want to get to now, in the last 3 years you've been on the senior men's Great Britain team, or? Yeah,
2017 was my first summer like racing with the team. So that was like, obviously was just a junior at Princeton then. So that was my first time in with the team, yeah.
And you guys have had some pretty good results. You've been third at a couple big regattas, world championships.
The world champs, yeah.
And you've had a silver medal in there as well for Euros. Is that right?
Yeah, and then last year won the World Cup series. So that was pretty cool. That was like the first sort of big win for like in a Great Britain best, which was really cool.
Outstanding. And here we have some, just to give the folks out there, the rowers and the coaches and maybe people who aren't familiar with the sport of rowing, tell us what this session, just really quickly, Tom, what these sessions are like. Incidentally, you're here right by your mate Mo Zbihi, and Mo just put down a big time in a 2K a couple of days ago, right?
Yeah. So Mo's gone and beaten my 2K score, my 2K record, which is obviously pretty epic, to be honest. Like,
Yeah.
really cool. Like, as a team, we just like keep pushing each other, particularly after like the lockdown and like after not training together in the boat for a while. It's been pretty cool to like see how people have taken it on. And I guess like both Mo and I have had pretty big PBs on the 2K, so that's pretty awesome.
So what are these times? What are we talking about? Let's share this with the this audience a little.
So Mo went 5:39.4, so that's what 1:24.8, which is a pretty massive time.
1:24.8 the whole way, folks. 500-meter split, 1:24.8. Many very fit, strong athletes.
I think John's gone there. Yeah, so I can just talk a bit about these sessions though. These here are like test days when we like here on the mats with the weights. So I always sit next to Mo on the tests, which is pretty cool. And obviously, especially the longer tests, 5K tests, you're able to sort of like really have a bit of a duel with each other, which is a lot of fun. And yeah, we always set it up this way for test days to make sure that I guess it feels like a slightly different like day to just a standard training day.
Okay. That's a perfect lead in because we do want to get into some data. I know we have people out there that are curious to look at the data, to see the training effect, to see the heart rate curves. So Tom, you just mentioned the 5K, sitting beside Mo, those test days, those very, very intense days on the erg. And, you wrote me something a few months ago. You sent me over, I think this is back, well, it should be here, February 1. You said to me, yeah, basically with 3K to go. And this is in reference to your 5K, which is now you're the second fastest man ever over 5K on the rowing ergometer. And the only guy faster, if I'm correct, is Mo, who's done it a couple times.
Yeah.
And you said to me, and I love this, and I know some of my coaches out there will appreciate this too, especially the rowing coaches. Yeah, basically with 3K to go, I was like, right. And you put this part in quotes as if you were speaking back to yourself from another place. You said, this is essentially as hard as I can go till the end. If I die, I die.
Yeah.
I think you,
yeah, I think I remember you'd seen my Firstbeat report potentially, and you were like, because, and I think we're going to see it in a sec, right? Like it's like 11 minutes in the red. There you go. 11 and a half minutes. So I guess that kind of says it all there. That basically, yeah, I think you kind of, those tests are never nice, and that you kind of know roughly, have an idea what you want to do and where you want to sit pace wise. And the idea of going under 15 minutes was pretty cool in my head. And I think
when did you know you could possibly slide under? Like
probably like halfway in, I was like, right, I'm in the right area. And then it's sort of like, but I knew it had been quite hard. As you can see, I was like well into the red, well before halfway in. And so then that's when I sort of had that thought, and you're like, okay, like you kind of sort of nothing, you sort of have to like roll the dice slightly and sort of risk it. So I guess at that point it was like, right, this is on. And I guess I probably didn't properly know until like that last K, where you're just like, right, this is just now sort of a somewhat of a like formality of just like holding on to this speed. Like the projected score had flicked under, and it's just sort of how far under you can go in that last bit. Yeah.
And question for you, and I rode for 3 years, as Craig Armacanian would jokingly say, you rode for a cup of coffee, Lowy.
Yeah.
But it was still a big experience for me. It was 3 years, pretty high. I rode 1 year at Cal, and absolutely loved the sport. But talk to me. You just said something that made me reflect a little bit on rowing and the ergometer. In that last K, you said I basically knew I had to hold on to the speed. Was there any part of you, or did you have any moment, or I guess it's a general thing about how you approach maximum effort, and this happens in a race, but did you think at any point, I'm not going to be able to get there, or were you like, it's every stroke, it's happening, it's happening. Yeah,
I guess for people who have erged and have done these pieces and row, I guess when it's going well for you, you always know you're going to finish.
Yeah.
It's when it starts to really suck, and I guess by the time I got to the last K, it was going well for me, and I hadn't like blown yet, I hadn't died yet. So then the sort of adrenaline starts to sort of sneak back in, and able to just continue to like grind it on. And I know that I can sprint for the last 500 meters regardless, you know.
So
And
this
so
anaerobic energy system that we'll see in the bike sessions. But to be fair,
exactly.
all I meant, of course, you'd never stop on an erg
Oh, I never stop. Yeah. But like there are
but I
points where
just
you like
meant,
wonder.
I meant like, do the quads, do the legs, the muscles, and we're going to get into this too. Like, what is the limiting factor? All I meant was, did you ever see those splits fall a little and think, oh shit, I can't get back to what I need to be at that 124, you know? And that's really the edge, the razor's edge of this whole game is like, how do you find that perfect point of balance between, well, as you said, and you know, I've heard it from other guys, other great guys in the sport, you know, if I die, I die. And that's not, you know, that's not overstating it.
Yeah, I think most rowers would happily say that, would like, you know, think in that way. And I'm sure that it's the same with a lot of like endurance sports, where it's like you're sitting on that edge and you're sort of teetering there, and people would rather like blow up and miss their target by a long way than like miss it by a couple of seconds and be like, well, I didn't really roll the dice and try.
Fantastic, dude. Fantastic. So let me give people out there a little insight. What we're looking at here is obviously we've been talking about the 5K on the rowing ergometer. And Tom, you know, Tom, what was your exact time? It was 14:58, 59.1.
58.1, I think. Yeah, 58. Yeah.
Yeah, 14:58.1. And here are his splits on the Concept 2, you know, the PM5. But what I want to highlight for people that are interested in learning for the first time about Firstbeat and what we deliver, this is the training report. So what you have here is a profile. This is just background information on the athlete. So we can see just general background information on Tom. A few things jump out. Resting heart rate 37. We all know that the fitter you are, the more aerobic conditioning you have, the lower your resting heart rate goes. So that's a nice sign. Tom's maximum, so the maximum heart rate he's ever attained is 190. That's very important to know because that helps us clarify and be accurate with the training effect score, which is right here, the 3.3. You can see here at 3.3, basically from a physiological standpoint means that the workout improved your aerobic fitness. And it had a mild impact on your anaerobic fitness because we also break out the anaerobic training effect, this 1.1, this darker blue dial on the outside. And we'll see what happens to that in some of the other workouts, how the anaerobic repeat sprintability is improved. I love how, Tom, you highlighted in that discussion of the 5K that you have confidence in your ability to sprint. So, you know, even though you've been doing a bunch of work, hammering away, just banging away, you know that you have that ability to throw it down at another level for a shorter period of time. Is that fair to say?
100, yeah, definitely. Feel like once you get into that last 500 on any piece, it's very much just not necessarily like a close the eyes and sort of hang on. It's more of just like you know you have your steps in there and you kind of know that you'll go through them because you need to really to make sure you get that edge. So yeah.
Perfect. Well, and one thing I loved about this, and again, kind of going back to advance the knowledge of this data for newbies out there, this, you know, you ramp up quickly. I call this a tabletop with a little bit of a drift, you know, upward in the heart rate. But the reason this is cool to me, and you and I talked about this months ago from sort of a heart rate analyst point of view, is you're in and out of yellow and red here, which is really great for the first part of a hard row, because that means your pacing is spot on. In other words, you're not ramping up too quickly, because if you get to that 187 number, that 188, that 189 right up against your max too fast, it ain't going to be pretty. It ain't going to go well. So you get there at the end. But the beautiful thing about getting to 187, which is the peak number Tom hits in this 5K, is it happens with negative splits. So you're going through your 500-meter splits, and they're getting faster and faster and faster. I'm reading here, and Tom, you can help me out if these are correct. I see 130.6, 130.5, 130.4, 130.4, 129. So now we're getting near the end, and you start hammering a little bit more, negative splitting this baby to the end, 127.3, and that's when the heart rate comes up. So what we like to see from the physiological standpoint is with an increase in output, we have an increase in the cost or in the effort.
Yeah.
And that's a beautiful thing. So tabletop with a little bit of drift, but not too much. And I love going in and out of yellow, saying, oh, I can go back down a little and still peg away here. Still bing, bing,
Yeah.
bing, right?
Yeah.
So that's beautiful. This is the heart rate chart, guys. These are Tom's training zones. Yellow is anaerobic. Red is race. I'm going to let Tom talk to you about the training zones and how he sets them.
Yeah, so largely they're sort of based on the parameters that we're set from the team, from within the team. So we know that these are like areas that we want to be, and we want to line them up together. So I kind of do it working backwards. So I know that like I want to be above 93% for that red zone, and
Right.
then and I guess you kind of bookend it as well. Like I know that my UT2 speed is 69% to 78%. Like and those are the two that I know really well. So then the bits in the middle, you can sort of work out from there, and you know that I know that UT1, from what we're set on like speed charts using percentage gold medal times, what those percentages are, and then I can like match it off there.
So hold on, let me interrupt.
So that I know that if to get 100%.
But let me highlight something. You said these are based off of gold medal time. So you're using a standard for the pace of a gold medal winning 8. Is that right?
Yeah. Yeah. Or gold medal winning float. So
yeah, that's fantastic.
I know that, and then working back on that, if I'm on the water in a pair, then it will be on the pair gold medal time. But you still know that the UT1 speed of going 6:08 in the pair is 78 to 87%.
And then we try to, and then we do a little, because you and I have talked about this. This is the art. When we talk about the title of this talk, this is very, very important to highlight for those out there. And anybody who's worked with heart rate, trained with heart rate, used it with athletes, there is an art to it. There is definitely a science we see with the training effect, with the QRT that we're going to cover. But the reason I bring this up, Tom, is because it's such a great point to talk about these, the standard for starting to extrapolate these intensity zones is pace on a gold medal 8. However, you and I have had conversations that the physiology, the effort doesn't always line up exactly with those numbers. So what we've done is we have to start to think about what values are going to represent the energy systems and the as it relates to the output that are appropriate to understanding your effort. So for example, what I mean by that is, guys, if a lot of us out there that aren't trained up the same way Tom is, put our red zone at 93% of max heart rate, we would have no time in red in most of our workouts. I got news for you. Most people think that the less fit you are, you go out and do a hard workout, you get all this quality time in the high zones. No, that's not the case. You fatigue and you can't go to high heart rates. Okay. So, we're going to get to an interesting quote, that I love from Tom about, holding the hand in the flame, so to speak. That ability to sustain effort above 93% of max heart rate, like Lance Armstrong rode in the Tour years ago. He had a radio in his ear, and he knew his heart rate the whole way, and he teetered just like you did right here on that threshold. That is why we set the zones the way we do, to know what they mean when we're at certain levels of intensity. Lastly, we'll move on real quickly here, but you can't see it in the yellow, but very, very important zone for me and for athletes and for training in general is this anaerobic threshold zone, because I want to know when lactate is building up, blood lactate is accumulating at a rate that is not as easily dealt with. We know we can buffer lactate; it's a good energy source, but your body has to be able to do that. And what's happening at 87% of max heart rate here for Tom is he's starting to accumulate blood lactate at a level that he's going to start to feel it. And that's why we have this set so high. His threshold is high. For most people, this would be 80% would be a normal level for somebody who's trained up a bit. So we'll get more into UT2 training. We have some good questions about that. UT1, we're going to look at some new data, but let's move on here. Okay, so Tom, why don't you take us through why you guys do a 3K? First of all, and also tell us where you're training here. This is super cool for people out there. You know, we went into lockdown. Where did you go? Where are you rowing on this erg right here?
Well, I went during the lockdown. I went back to my parents' house, which is in the like rural Gloucestershire, which is so quite a long way west of London for people who aren't familiar with the geography of the United Kingdom. And so they're basically training in the garage at the end of the driveway. So that was sort of my base for the lockdown period. In terms of your first question, like why do we do a 3K test? That was actually a new test that came in during the lockdown, and one that we wanted that I think the coaches wanted to try out and see. Obviously, it's very easy to just like train to a 2K, but you've got to do the longer stuff. And honestly, they're absolutely like horrific. Just like essentially just a 2K pace for 3K. Or like I think the percentage that we sort of discussed was going sort of 97.5% or 98% of our 2K pace for the 3K. So managed to do that on the first one, but this was obviously before my 2K speed increased. So I guess that's a different. It would probably be expected to go slightly faster now. So I guess they're absolutely savage, and I just remember feeling absolutely terrible for a couple of days afterwards.
Well, what I want to highlight about this too is you and I seem to have a little bit of a different reflection on this data, which is fantastic, because anytime biofeedback is coming, I always feel like there are two ways to interpret the story. I see this all the time, and both are valid. It's really interesting. So here, I'll just read this for our viewers, and hopefully they can have a stance as well and make sense of it. So you say to me, Johnny, I put myself in a hole last weekend for this piece, and I say, are you kidding me? Like, I'm just looking at this and just reflecting on, again, for the rowers out there, look at the level or descending splits, and finishing at 125. It's just phenomenal effort. So that should be the first thing that's noted. But I say to you, and we'll look at the data here, and again, comments from the audience for sure. Let us know what you think. I say, love how much time in yellow on this piece, and your immediate reaction is, I was impressed with my ability to sit in red. So we have this kind of different, and both are true. The physiologist in me wants to say, you can actually do this work and not be in red. A great friend of mine, a cyclist named Johnny G, he was a huge heart rate proponent. He invented spinning 25 years ago in LA. And he used to tell me stories about getting on the bike and turning the crank and being being at 50 beats a minute. Actually riding a bike and being at 46 beats. He had such control over his physiology that he was able to balance in that way, which is just unbelievable. So again, my point here is I'm going on and on about efficiency, yellow, being on that, riding right on that threshold. But you had a different take, which is outstanding. You said to me, I'm impressed with my ability to sit in red and hold that hand in the fire. And I love this part. It's just a perfect lesson for all the young rowers out there too. Indefinitely, seemingly, because that's really you believing and training your mind to go where the body isn't so sure it could go, and being okay with it, the perception. So here we go. Here's the data. Again, guys, I want to have everybody look at the training effect score, because it's our summary data point that tells you what the session did to impact your fitness level. Or think of it like this. I always tell the military boys, I invented a new way of defining training effect. The bigger the disturbance, the bigger the training effect. So you disrupt homeostasis by doing something, effort, climbing a mountain, rowing a boat, running, you're going to create a disturbance. And the bigger that disturbance, and as you said, you had a good way of saying it too, Tom, a few minutes ago. You said time under pressure or time under tension. The bigger
under duress,
under duress, exactly. So here's Tom's. This is the first 3K. Again, this was back in, I think, was this March, Tom?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
Yeah. So,
Maybe
you know,
April, start of April. Yeah.
okay. And we're pinging along in the yellow, and we get to, you know, a little more than a third of the way through. And this is what Tom means. He can sit in red and enjoy it, enjoy life. Would you say, is enjoying life overstating the
Yeah,
situation?
might be a bit generous, you know. Yeah, might be slightly generous.
Okay. One thing I want to show everybody too, look at the summary data. The average heart rate for the piece, 170 beats per minute. And this is interesting to me. The first thing I noted is Tom went to 181 in this piece. This piece lasts 8 minutes and 44 seconds. That is not short. That is a good duration. Max heart rate for all you guys out there with a proper warm up and a trained athlete and a willingness to go can be achieved in 1 minute. Okay, so what we're looking at here is 181 is, you know, 7, 8, 9 beats from your max. So this, to me, as a data scientist, I'm going, there's a little step in there that we might be able to access at some point when feeling better, when in a better place. And not to mean you weren't in a good place. You were, and you did well. But just when things are really humming, there's a few more beats, at least 4 or 5 or 6 or 7 we saw on the 5K that you can access. And whether or not that correlates to output and power,
yeah,
it should, it
yeah.
might, it's something to consider. So I love looking at that. And we'll get into that a little more because we do another 3K 2.5 months later, and we're going to show you guys the data. By the way, I want to highlight something else on the training report. This down here, this blue line, guys, is basically the 7-day TRIMP sum. We deliver another parameter on total load called TRIMP. TRIMP stands for training impulse. And it's basically with the more intensity and more duration, the TRIMP score goes up. And you can see here, the TRIMP for this piece was 30. So as you accumulate TRIMP over a 7-day sum, you get your running total for what we call training load or acute training load. And this is how we extrapolate our acute to chronic work ratio, which we'll see later in one of these slides as well. Comparing the acute load would be, of course, be the 7-day TRIMP, and the chronic load would be the average of 28 days. And there's a lot of science about how to manage that ratio of the acute training load to the chronic. And Tom, this is something I want to bring this up too, because it just popped into my memory. You know, a month ago we lost a little data. Tell us about your bike ride and losing data and why it's so important. And I just hit on it. What made me think about it is it's very important to understand our load for the week, and it's also a bit of accountability and competitiveness. And I see when you have a big heavy week, you're up at 1,300 TRIMP for the week, which is high. Just to put that in perspective for you guys, when I work with San Jose Sharks, and I hope Mike Potenza's on this in the audience because he's a fantastic friend and strength coach for the San Jose Sharks for a long time. But his top guys, his top defensemen, for example, in the heat of the season, when they're playing games, all the TRIMP scores from games, training, and gym time, everything is around that 1,300 per week level. So, and remember, the defensemen are playing big minutes, 28 minutes a game. So we're talking about pro hockey, top line defensemen, rowers. That's a general. You're in the same ballpark for acute workload. So that's really interesting. But tell us about that time when we lost some data and why you were a little bit pissed off and what that has to do with your personality.
Yeah, I guess it just kind of frustrated me. Yeah, I guess it just kind of frustrated because I was just a bit like, okay, this is I kind of just wanted it all on there to like show my training loads, and so that when I look back at it, because you can go back through your dashboard and look at all the training you've done, and that's why like it's quite important. I always write notes as to what the session was, how I felt, because I just wanted to be able to go back and have a look at it, and I guess for my own sort of satisfaction, be able to see all the work that I put in. And so it was quite frustrating when I'd done like a 4-hour ride and it just didn't show up. I just lost the data, which was quite annoying because a 4-hour ride, and I think I did it. I think it was like a 33 k's an hour, something like that. So suddenly, then you're like, wow, that's going to be like a training effect of close to 4 probably. And
right.
if not over 4, with like a high anaerobic level. So the tremp's gonna be huge. So it was just something that I wanted to have in there, because otherwise it's quite easy not to forget, but you just suddenly sort of lose track of some of your training when it's not there. You're doing so much training that it's important to be able to look at each individual at the sessions and the accumulation.
I
So
feel
just
exactly the same way. Exactly the same way. And again, I think that attention to detail, that willingness to dive in, to look at it, to be accountable, is a big part of why you're rowing and why you're rowing at such a high level. All right, so what we're going to do now, participants and Tom, we're going to start to fly through a few of these training load slides, because I want to get to QRT, and then we want to get to questions, because a big part of this is to hear some questions and to give Tom's response to those questions. So this is the 2K. This is the warm-up, guys. Tom gets into the red, and again, you hold it there nicely. This is the unbelievable Great Britain time where you put down the 5:39.6. As we talked about, Tom's buddy Mo just put down a 5:39.4. And I want to just bring up a little point here. You and I laughed about it right before the call, Tom, because I saw it all over Instagram. For me, this is unbelievable. It's normal. Boundaries and parameters, when they're surpassed, it seems as though whether it's quorum sensing, as Zach Bush would say, or just man's ability to relate to somebody that he knows well, man and women's ability to do this, and then push themselves beyond for whatever reason. But how do you feel about it, and what did it make? Did it make you laugh, or were you surprised that Mo went faster only weeks after you did?
I definitely wasn't surprised. Like, I knew the guy had the capability to, and he's a phenomenal athlete. Guess he actually called me beforehand. And he was just like, "Look, it wouldn't have happened if you hadn't done it, weren't there pushing me." So I guess that was pretty humbling. The guy's won the Olympic Games, so to have someone like that tell you that is pretty epic. Also, I guess just it's about pushing each other on the team, and as I think both of us said, in all the sort of stuff that surrounded it, it's it doesn't mean anything if we don't win next year at the Olympics. So that's always the focus, and you got to stay grounded, and it's cool to be able to do it and to be able to smash that barrier. But it doesn't necessarily it's a cool thing to have done, but the main focus is definitely once we're back in a boat together and on the water. And so I guess in that regard, it's quite epic that there's 2 of us in a boat together going under 540. That's pretty incredible.
Great point. And I loved one little thing, and we'll talk about this slide and move on. I love that Great Britain Rowing added a little comment that said it was pointed toward the Germans, and we're going to get to the Germans and the Dutch in a little bit. But all those people, all the sports scientists out there, I hope they're going to love this slide and be able to comment or reflect themselves. But Tom, if I asked you the limiter of maximal human performance that we've been talking about, these ergs, being in a boat race and pushing harder than you thought you could, and going beyond and keeping the legs down and all that stuff that you do, are the muscles the limiter? Is the brain, the unconscious brain, the limiter, as Tim Noakes would argue? Or is the brain with consciousness, as Samuel Marcora would argue, the limiter? Which do you sort of gravitate toward?
I think I probably gravitate towards the consciousness, just because I definitely think that, and I think when we look at the next 3K, we could discuss it. That might be the next slide. That kind of I just didn't really going into it. I was kind of oh, this absolutely sucked last time. I just want to go the same speed, and I kind of potentially allowed myself to let the piece dictate to me how I felt slightly going into it. Just because you know it's going to suck, but then once you're doing it, you're very definitely able to sort of continue to push yourself through it. I guess the limitation, and that's I guess why records keep being broken right across all sports is that obviously diets are better, sports science is better, training's better, but there's definitely an element of once someone gets to a level, people then begin to reset their standards to try and break those barriers. And that is very definitely a conscious decision. And so you go out there to chase those barriers and to continue to push them. And it's a conscious decision to do so. And, you can obviously you've got to I train phenomenally hard every day. There's a lot of sessions in a week. It's not you couldn't just get on the erg and be like, I want to do this, so I'm going to go do it. There's a lot you can't put the cart before the horse in that regard. But there's definitely an element of, if you've done all the other things right to get you to that point, I believe personally it's like the conscious aspect of it, of like how you feel about the piece, or like fearing a 2K or these 3Ks or a 5K or a test, that's something that you like decide to do, and you can to some extent be mindful of that, and then sort of push the negative thoughts away, essentially, to be able to like consciously attack a piece.
Yeah, well said, and I 100% agree. And the word here for me that Mark Cora, highlights is perception. And I think with Mo and with you and the 2K and training and isolation, really it's how we perceive things that manifests in our performance. Okay, so I'll move on quickly. In any case, for the viewers, because they might be thinking, well, what happened on the 3K, Tom? You went a little quicker, but this bit about I gave it too much respect, feared it. I think you were thinking after the fact, I could have gone a lot quicker.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, definitely. I think I could have gone under 127, which would have been pretty good. Yeah,
it would have been insane. So here, guys, some of the heart rate data that's really awesome for me to analyze and dig deeper on. We talked about the peak in the first 3K, 181 beats per minute. Tom hit 184 on the second one. The quick recovery score, which we're going to jump into just now, is on the morning of the first 3K was 42%. So a little bit down, which doesn't mean that much, but it could influence a little bit of the feeling. The QRT on the second one was a little bit higher, 61%. Yeah, go ahead, Tom.
Yes, I was just going to say, like, one of the things I think you've got to be careful with like, if you like, I wear a sports watch that takes heart rate all the time, you get a lot of data fed to you, QRTs. I think you've got to be aware of the QRT, and it's a useful tool for the bigger picture. But on an individual day, I think you shouldn't necessarily let the QRT dictate your overall feeling, because it's very easy to like, wake up in the morning, look at a screen and see what it's telling you, and then letting that influence how you feel. And when you wake up in the morning, you don't necessarily have like a mood or a sort of feeling, and so if you look at it, the first thing you do is look at like your watch or your phone, and it's like, oh, you're only 12% recovered. I had a couple of days over the lockdown where I was like 12%, 10% recovered. And then you're like, well, I've now got to go get on the erg. In those days, you can't really, obviously, it's probably going to be suck a bit more, but
well,
I think it's important to like let those
talk about that a little bit. And sorry to interrupt, but I just want to get to a few questions. And I know both you and I we talk a lot. So these conversations are unbelievable. And for the viewers too, we're going to do more. We're going to dive deeper into data, and Tom and I we're going to try to do a follow-up maybe 3-6 months from now and see where things are. But regarding QRT, because I want to touch on that for the folks listening. Look what you say here. This is the last workout before. Right now, Tom, you're on a break from training, right? A few weeks. And you say here, this was meant to be a 2K. And if I'm correct, your coach said, we're not going to do a 2K. We've done enough. You're going to do 12:50 on pace and 3 minutes rest, and then a 1K on pace. And I love this comment. I'm going to read it for all our viewers. This was awesome. Felt great. And the reason I show this slide is, let's look where Tom's QRT and general top level parameters from Firstbeat were that morning, the morning of that piece. Well balanced, 82 in the high green. The training status combines the quick recovery, which is a 3-minute resting measurement for heart rate and heart rate variability, and it combines training load to assess your balance. The training load, the acute to chronic work ratio, which again is that 1 week compared to the prior 28 days average, 0.9. When this is on 1.0, you're on that button. You're right in that what Tim Gabbett would refer to as the sweet spot. When you're not too high and not too low in that ratio, you're around 1.0, give or take. So that's nice for balance. And then on this day, Tom's quick recovery, the 3-minute measurement was 81% for the scaled score, which is what we do to make it quick and easy to understand and digest the heart rate variability metrics. Okay, so moving on. This is my big wordy slide about HRV. You guys can dive into this on your own. There's tons of good research and a lot of ways to look at it, but this is how we do it consistently. Had a great time at the HRV summit last year with Firstbeat. met a great guy who gave me some interesting insight into the way that he does QRT. He does it every morning when he goes to the bathroom. And I started implementing this because it's an easy way to never miss one and to do it first thing in the morning. So just a little, it's a, you know, that's Martin Boucher, by the way. He's a leader in HRV science. So I figured if he was doing it, it was good enough for me. You want to be consistent in the way you're performing the QRT. And why we're doing QRT, guys, and looking at heart rate variability, it's easy to measure, and it indicates resiliency, adaptability, immunity, and state of recovery. It's linked to the 10th cranial nerve and the parasympathetic, the branch of the autonomic nervous system, the parasympathetic branch. And there's so much that's linked. I could do the whole talk on just why vagal tone and the 10th cranial nerve is so important. Rest and digest, the gut health, the brain gut axis. So we can get into all that, but there are many things that impact it. Tom, you touched on this, but when you're an athlete, as Tom is, and you have a routine, we're going to be able to see the influence of training load on the QRT. Okay, and training load influences it greatly, and that's what Tom was talking about. I thought it was an excellent point, and you can tell us how you do it and how often you do it, Tom. But it was a great point that if you see 18 or 15%, which is low on the scaled score for quick recovery, you're not going to freak out. It's no big deal. You know why that is what it is. In many cases, it was because of your Monday ride, which is how many kilometers is your Monday ride, and what's the speed, and what's the, and I'm going to show the data. So you talk about that a little.
Yeah. So normally it would ride for sort of 120 to 100 to 120K. Normally did a couple. I did one sort of from my parents' house to Henley, which is round trip like 190, which is like pretty cool, and it was good fun. But obviously it takes it out of you a lot. And I think the next day after that, I legitimately think I was about 7% recovered, which was then the session the next day was absolutely horrible. But it kind of like, I knew why that was the case, and I knew I sort of just had to get on with it. Potentially that was too much. I had sort of bitten off a bit much, but it's like pretty good to be able to like do that every now and again and just sort of see how it goes.
Yeah, great. And you know what's so interesting? You pull up these slides, and right away, color is so important. And again, I'll reference Johnny G. The reason color, he used to say training with color. Before anybody, he wanted to show color as it pertains to heart rate levels. The reason it's so important is it triggers things in our brain, and we can associate it with it. It's emotional. So now suddenly, after seeing red all the time, holding the hand in the fire, yellow in all your charts before you get to red, now we see a lot of green. And this is the long ride for those people out there. On the x-axis of this chart, the Firstbeat dashboard here showing the heart rate tracing, guys, is time, is duration. And we see a lot of green now. And green, Tom, what is green? Is it UT2?
UT1.
UT1.
So it's like slightly above. Yeah.
Yeah. And everybody out there is probably going, oh, well, that looks like a piece of cake. But check this out. 3.5 on the first half of the ride, training effect, by the way, with almost a 3.0 anaerobic. So repeat sprintability from the peaks, the shorter duration, higher interval, and then recovery bouts. Yeah. And the second part of the ride, 3.3. And the trimp, by the way, I can read the trimps here, 181 on the first part, 114 on the second. So that's, 200, almost 215 trimp score, if that's, is that right? Almost 300.
300 trimp, yeah.
So my point here is UT1, banging away on the bike. How do your legs feel on this kind of a ride? How does your body feel compared to rowing?
Yeah, pretty good, like most of the way, and then invariably the last sort of 20K is pretty horrible. But you just sort of feel a bit short of like sugars and things. I think afterwards you get that quite epic like glow. I think people who cycle a lot on this talk will probably know what I'm talking about. Where you're just like totally done, totally done, but you feel quite epic, and it's potentially a bit weird. But yeah, that's I think afterwards is when you start to really sort of feel
fantastic. So I'm going to try to wrap up our slides in like 2 minutes, so we have time for questions. Basically, for all the participants too, I believe, John Lally and Tom George, we believe in overtime. So we're going to do a little extended time to take some questions. So anybody who wants to stick around for another 10 minutes, we're going to do a little overtime. So feel free. If you got to go, we understand. But One thing about the variability that I want to show, and again, this is data driven. We have a lot of values being shown on this screen. This is Tom's dashboard. The blue vertical bars are the aerobic and anaerobic training effect. The light blue, the aerobic, the dark blue, the anaerobic. And the green dots are the QRT measurements. So you can see that Tom is doing QRT every day. And what I want to highlight, and then I have a question for you, Tom, again, Martin Boucher, the HRV specialist from France, who's also an endurance athlete, he told me that one of the most important things about HRV is the variability of the variability. So wrap your head around that right now. Remember, heart rate variability is just the difference in successive time between heartbeats. So when you're in a well-recovered state and you have that parasympathetic balance with the sympathetic side, you're going to have variation in the time between successive heartbeats. It allows the systems to be adaptable. But what Tom's showing us here, which is just awesome, day to day, your HRV changes. And that's largely influenced by the training load. But Tom, question for you. How do you do it? Where do you do it? How do you do it? Lying down, standing up? What's your methodology for QRT?
Yeah, basically, first thing in the morning when I wake up, just bang on the heart rate strap. Literally, like, alarm goes off, and then just roll over, pick up the heart rate band off the floor, and just put it on and do it right there. I just figured that was like the easiest time to put it on and do it with like actually committing to doing it, rather than kind of being like, oh, well, I've got to do this or that and I've got stuff to do. It's kind of like before you sort of start the day.
Perfect. Love it. Just getting that routine, it gives you. I always say to my guys when I'm working with a team and myself, it's a little bit of a meditation too. It's a meditative process. You can work on a little bit of breathing. I don't mind training a little. I'm not worried about modulating that. If it's a chance for me to work on some diaphragmatic breath work and also a little visualization about intention, that's a good chance to do that as well. Because 3 minutes, if that's the only time you can do that kind of work, we might as well take it. All right. Exactly, so I think this is our last slide. Then we can do some questions. Tom, I put on the title of this slide, looking back to see forward. Originally, this was a video. Turns out the video is hard to do in this kind of a setup. But just take us through, here you are sitting in the bow of the 8. This is last year at correct me if I'm wrong, but this is World Championships, right, in Linz, Austria?
Yeah.
Take us through how this went, your feeling, and then I have one last quotation you said to me a few months ago, and we'll finish with that. But what about this race? How are you feeling? How do you approach a race? This is right at the start. Take us through this race.
I think ultimately, like, slightly disappointing as a race, as a single piece. I think as a group, we probably felt like we'd put ourselves in a position to win the World Championships last year through our training, and didn't maybe execute it on the day, which I guess plays back into that like conscious, unconscious thing slightly, and that's probably a whole other webinar. I think probably like in eights racing, it's fierce, and you've got to get off the line really well and aggressively, and basically you want to get to the first 500 meter mark first, and then you want to get to the 1K mark first and just keep going from there. And I can't remember it, but everyone always says there's some stat about in eights racing, like how much they win, like the boat leading at the 500 meter mark will end up winning the race.
No kidding. Okay.
Yeah. Also, always cool to obviously be in these races and to be a part of it, but I think ultimately on the day, slightly disappointed. Like, winning a medal is always fantastic, and I'm not taking away from that at all. But I think after where I believe we'd put ourselves as a team and as a boat, and particularly in winning the World Cup Series that year, to then only end up with a bronze medal was maybe slightly disappointing to us as a group. However, also, as I said, winning a medal is fantastic, and something that's like I'm very pleased that I've been able to do a couple of times over the years. So that's great. Yeah.
100%. So we'll finish with this, and then we'll go to some questions. But you had this awesome response to me. I just shot you a little note a couple months ago on Instagram when the Olympics for a moment there, they were thinking of pushing it back a little bit, and then of course they pushed it back a full year. And I wrote to you 2021. You had said something about the Olympic Games, and I said 2021. And my mind, my expectation was you were going to be bummed and disheartened and kind of like, I can't believe it. And you wrote back, no factor, let's go.
Yeah.
And I love this mentality. And you talked to me a little bit about the Michael Jordan documentary, The Last Dance, and how how inspiring that was to watch. And tell us why, tell everybody out there why you said just quite simply, no factor, let's go, and how that pertains to training and pushing the Olympics back a year.
Yeah, I guess like I ultimately just couldn't control it at all. I had no control over the situation. The coronavirus pandemic is something that none of us have any control over, and can't see what's going to happen over the next like weeks, months, years. So in that regard, I think that it had been talked about quite a lot by big athletes and the IOC themselves. So Australia had already said I think they weren't going to send their team. So the ball was already rolling in motion, and so in that regard, I think that there's no point in me wasting any energy in sort of worrying or panicking or getting down about the fact it's been delayed. Obviously, it's like not ideal. I wanted to go to the Olympics this summer, but I think that this is just an opportunity to get better. Essentially, was how I sort of looked at it. Was like, okay, this has been cancelled. I can't control that, so I might as well move on and get on with the training that I can do, because I've now been given 365 days to get better than I am at the moment, or I would be going into the games.
Awesome.
So in that regard, I think that ultimately it had to be a no factor situation. Yeah.
Right. But it's such an interesting thing, because your first Olympics, and you've been selected to the 8, and now suddenly your first Olympics is over there, and now we're going back into, well, right now you're on holiday, and selection and all the processes that go into making a boat starts over again. But I think that the cool thing is, again, it's like your mindset is level and balanced, and you're not going to, no pun intended, you're not going to let the wake throw you off keel, off your balance point.
Yeah.
So, all right, well, let's get some questions. Let's make everybody happy out there, and maybe read one of their questions and give a couple answers. So, all right, Tom, here we go. This is like rapid fire speed dating. Do you use Firstbeat every day?
Yes.
Great. Do you focus on heart rate
every day? Actually, not so much, because I know it's there and I know what it is, and I know that I want to be like on a percentage of it. But where my heart rate gets in a piece doesn't really matter to me, because like ultimately on test pieces you're trying to do the best you can anyway. So that's something that it's not worth thinking about really. And maybe it's interesting to look at it and be like, okay, I could maybe I'm quite a long way below my actual max HR, so maybe I can actually dive in a bit deeper next time. But in the moment, I don't necessarily think that like where my heart rate gets to is massively like relevant. Obviously, I need it to be able to set my training bands, and it's something that is interesting. And but I think that it's definitely something for like afterwards, not necessarily at the time.
100% agree. And what I'll add from the data science perspective for viewers that are thinking about heart rate training and understanding training effect and TRIMP, in order for training effect to be accurate and TRIMP to accumulate accurately, the heart rate max on profile must be accurate. So if you're starting to train with heart rate, and just the same way, Tom, you just said about your training zones, for those to be accurate and meaningful, we have to start with that, the bookends, as you put it. The highest heart rate is very important for understanding training effect scores. And actually the lowest heart rate becomes also important for calculating TRIMP scores. So lowest heart rate and highest heart rate, but within an effort, you're going where you're going to go, and you're asking your body to do something, and you're going to get through the work, and then after the fact, we can analyze and dig deeper and figure out progressions and over time longitudinally. All right, next one. Coach, I think this is a coach says, I focus on, or maybe as an athlete and a coach, when I perfect my rhythm, my power takes less effort. Do you agree with that? Is it possible to master rhythm when listening to music? Interesting. Or a friend? I can't picture you having a conversation doing your 5.
I think I would say that rhythm is absolutely vital, particularly in rowing, definitely, and probably all sports really. I think that there's an element of rhythm to them. And then in terms of the musical aspect of things, I'd say definitely, because I guess I find that when I'm training, particularly doing like 20K erg or something like that, like a long steady state piece, is that ultimately you kind of enter a somewhat of like a flow state where you're just like, you're in your like rhythm, and you're somewhat of a trance state where you just go and do it. And then, because obviously 20K takes an hour and 12 minutes, right? But you do it and you're done. And once you finish, you definitely just like, wow, okay, where did that sort of go? I don't remember. You don't remember cognizantly every single stroke you took along the way. You kind of just like settled into your rhythm, and the rhythm is vital for that.
Perfect, 100%. All right, next question is, what metrics do you suggest communicating to athletes and how? Text, email, verbal, motivation to get next level. So I'll take this one quickly, Tom, and you can tell me what you think as an athlete and listening to some of your great coaches like Greg and like Jurgen. So my advice when you're looking at heart rate training, and this is what I did. I first put on a heart rate monitor in 2006. Somebody asked me if I had ever trained with one in Sports Club LA in a gym where I was a trainer. I said, no, I hadn't. And the first thing I did is I started doing all my different workouts at the time. I was running a lot of stadium stairs. I was doing track and field, and I would see where I went, what I would get to doing certain things. And then, of course, you start to push yourself and see, well, how high can I go running stairs? Anyway, my point is, start with the basics. I would look at peak heart rate. I would look at average heart rate. After you understand your average heart rate for a piece, just like you do, Tom, when the reason you stopped, we had 2 reports for that long ride. And I know this is you wanted to see training data, average heart rate, and training data, average heart rate. You didn't want the break in between having a cup of coffee with your mate to throw off those numbers. The problem is that training effect can't be broken up. And we know that. But my point is, I'll move on after this. The most valuable data we provide at Firstbeat is the training effect score, because there's a lot in it. It's a dynamic parameter that's guided by EPOC on the aerobic side, excess post-exercise oxygen consumption. So if you have too much rest, the training effect score, the EPOC goes down, and your training effect score won't be as big. So very interestingly enough, when we start doing those longer rides, and I told you this, I want you to keep the break in there. And I want to see what the EPOC does during that, because you told me it's a short break. So it shouldn't destroy the building of that greater EPOC and the building of ultimately a 4.0 workout. But it could. And a lot of teams use training effect to understand how much rest they need to have, or how much is allowable before the training effect starts to go too low. Well, the EPOC goes too low, and then it's hard to build back up and reset a new peak. So to summarize, start with the data you understand. Communicate that to your athletes. Just like Greg, I remember back at Princeton, this is so valuable, I want to put it back in. He would show the heart rate tracings directly to the athletes, just like we were going over the curves, and show how much time in red. And what he wanted to show is if he wanted to correlate if there was more time in red and the performance went up, positive. But ultimately, over time, if there's less time in red and the performance is the same or up, you're getting more efficient in a training session. Not necessarily the test piece, because we're always going to hold a hand in the fire in the test piece. But point is, communicate the data that you understand yourself well, and then build into the other parameters such as training effect, anaerobic training effect, TRIMP scores, QRT, HRV. But I would always do it face-to-face.
Do it verbally. That was what I was going to say.
Tom, so give us your experience with some of your best coaches, and what do you like on that?
I think I'll just really quickly just say I think verbally is always the best way. Otherwise, I guess one sort of story for motivation and pushing you on was when the Olympics did get postponed, and this wasn't verbally, but we'd already had like a WhatsApp group set up for the guys who were named in the 8, and Olympics get postponed. Everyone's sort of a bit down about it, and we just got a text from Jurgen, and it just said like, I'm ready. I hope you are like, for this next year.
Love it.
The plan doesn't change, just the like time frame, and so that kind of comes through, and you're like, this guy's 75 or 74, and he's just still as motivated as ever. He's won every Olympics for the past like 9 Olympics, whatever it is, and so that was massively motivating. But that obviously wasn't like a face-to-face one. I would say that most of the time, like, it's best to do it face-to-face, like, because then you can open it up more as a sort of discussion than just like and it's better to always like continue to like learn off each other, so you can keep asking questions.
Outstanding. I love that about Jurgen's text. And it's funny how a short, to the point, authentic comment can just raise everybody. Again, I'll say it again, quorum sensing. We're just pulling from the group energy, the dynamic, vibrational, shared consciousness, right? Okay. I think we touched on HRV and health and wellness. And you want to add anything on that?
I think guest day today, I do my QRT. That's probably what I'd say. And then obviously I've got my sports watch that tells me like a little bit and has HRV measurements. So yeah.
Sure. And I'm guys, also, I want to say for some of these questions that are so awesome coming through, I'm going to answer all of these offline, and we'll put them in the published version of this. But this is kind of a cool one, just because the times we're in, Tom, and you can hit this one. What kind of adjustments during this period of kind of, I don't know, isolation, lockdown, not training with the team because of this virus that is doing whatever it's trying to do, which in my opinion isn't much, to ensure that you're staying mentally and physically healthy and minimize excess stress?
Yeah, I guess my big thing I'd say I'd sort of incorporate into like day to day was so using the app Headspace more and more, like try to make that like a part of my routine, just as like I guess I'd like read a lot about it, and a few of the guys on the team had been using it for a while, and it was something that I was just quite interested in. It was like something, I honestly went into it as like this is an experiment and a test to see.
But tell us what it is.
I've heard that like being mindful, using like mindfulness techniques in sports is like massive, and it's basically guided meditation. I'd heard that it was like something that a lot of athletes use in all sports, and I basically went into it to be like, I don't know if this will work for me. I'm sure it's an individual thing, but I'll give it a go and I'll try it out. And found that actually really like enjoyed, and like those like 20 minutes a day that I was able to like just like take that time. And I think like mentally there's a lot going on. There's a lot like of information coming through. We keep being told like, oh, the Olympics might be cancelled. The Olympics might be this or that. Pretty good to just sort of sit back, take a moment to like not really worry about it, and just like that sort of that like addresses the mental side, I guess, that question.
Yeah, perfect. No, that's great. It's so important. Again, what I'll highlight for people out there that are thinking about increasing their training or thinking about taking things to the next level is, when you talk about something like Headspace, what we're really focused on with that kind of an app, with any meditation or any awareness training, is really linked directly to QRT, readiness, resiliency, rest and digest. So that's why we have HRV measurement in Firstbeat, is to see that those things that Tom's doing in his life, we know we're going to hit the erg hard. We know we're going to cycle hard. Tom, you told me that awesome workout. I know people love hearing this kind of stuff. You did 90 minutes on the watt bike a few weeks ago, right?
Yeah.
And give us just for those out there that know the watt bike and know wattages, what was your average watts for 90 minutes?
It was 339. Yeah.
339 average watts. And I'll throw this out. I mean, Craig Amerkanyan, coached at Stanford for 20 years, Berkeley rower. He knows the watt bike. He can appreciate how hard that is. He had a standard for his guys on the team. I think, Craig, you'll have to correct me if I'm wrong, but it was 20 minutes over 300. And you did 90 minutes over 330. My point is, the sympathetic nervous system, the fight or flight, the ability to turn on, the ability to get off the line, we train that all the time in the group, side by side, music, everybody's talking about rhythm. Now we have to train the ability to turn off, to clear the mind, to balance things, to stay level. That's why you respond the way you did to the Olympics being pushed back, because you have enough awareness to complement all the training, all the fight or flight, all the go with some stop. And that's my message about wellness, about longevity and sustaining efforts. Yes, we got to put in the hard work. We love that. And rhythm helps with that. And friends help with that, and coaches and motivation. And we also have to put in the off time, the meditative time, the awareness time, the breath work, the cold exposure, the nutrition. So anyway, I digress, but I love this stuff, so I get into it. All right, what do you like out of these questions, bud? Pick a few. What do you like?
How many hours a week? It's I'd say it's probably in a boat when we're at the training center, like all in, probably 6-7 hours a day actually training physically, like in training sessions. So that's like 49 hours a week. And some days it's normally just one session, so you take that back. So that's like a little bit less, so it's probably like 45 hours a week.
Around 40 to 45 hours a week. Unbelievable.
How can my heart rate monitoring help that you don't overload? I'd say that just like making sure you're in the right zones. for each thing, because obviously it's very easy to just like go too hard basically for a long leg, especially if you're like ambitious and want to like see improvements quickly. But ultimately in rowing especially, it's like there isn't really a way to, you can sort of cheat the system. You have to just like sort of do your time to some extent, so make sure you're in the right zones. Periodization methods, I actually saw one of these come through as well on the live chat.
Yeah, I saw that too. Good one. Yeah, let's catch that.
I guess I'd say that, yeah, there is like periodization to some extent. In the winter, we also do more miles and longer stuff to build like base work. I don't necessarily think that it's period. I think that the program as a whole is set up in like year-long chunks. I know that it gets written in like a sort of 6 months at a time, even though we don't get sent it that often. So in that regard, I guess there is periodization. I'm not massively involved in the like writing of the program.
Right.
And, how would you differ the complexity of each session for beginners? I think that when you're starting out in rowing and it's boring, but to some extent you need to like build a base to be able to like have something there, and just like going straight into really short pieces is essentially like CrossFit training, not necessarily rowing specific training. And then attention to technology regarding training status. I guess like I sort of touched on that earlier, I guess, with like QRT scores and like not letting that like influence your mindset going into it. I'm quite fascinated just to see like how my sort of physiology works. Like I've only had the sports watch for a short amount of time, so I've been like getting used to that. And like the thing in particular I'm quite interested by is like the sleep data. And I guess that this like plays into question 11 as well, which is sort of HRV, I guess, is done via the watch and plays into the like scores that you get for the sleep data.
Let's talk about, let me just interrupt for a second, Tom, and talk for those who are wondering how you collect data. The way that I collect data with my own training and the way Tom's doing it now and individual athletes is with a Firstbeat sensor. So this is the Firstbeat sensor, and the Firstbeat sensor is Bluetooth and downloads to the Firstbeat Live iPhone app for QRT, for training load. And you can interface with the phone for real-time data, and the same thing with the iPad. So when I work with a basketball team or soccer team or a hockey team, they have the iPad going with live data on all their athletes on the rink or on the field. In Tom's case, in my case too, when I'm running in the mountains, I sync this Firstbeat sensor with my Suunto watch. Okay, so now it's talking to my watch for real-time feedback, but I'll always download and do all my analytics from the Firstbeat dashboard. So that, Tom, that's kind of how you're set up. We got you one of these sensors start of the year. And the reason I was stoked to get you this sensor too is it's a memory belt. So I finally, last year we came out with a memory belt, and same with Greg and Princeton Heavies. They use these memory belts now because you can go on the water, do a whole session, save everything, come back, and it will push real-time training effect, real-time trim, heart rate data to the iPad if you open it up, or you just download it and see it all after. So it makes collecting data a lot easier. So that's what you're doing for all your HRV measurements and using the watch if you need it, but also downloading straight to the Live app on the phone and then seeing all the metrics and the analytics in the dashboard. Is that fair to say?
Yeah. I'd say that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Looking at these, if we jump into these motivation questions, I guess.
Yeah.
In terms of specializing in one sport, I probably was pretty late to that. I through the whole way through school, played rugby alongside rowing, and I think that was like great for me as an individual athlete and like helping with my development. And it meant that when I did transition into rowing, I was excited to sort of focus on one sport, and that only happened when I got to Princeton. Does age depend on the sport? I don't know. I guess slightly. I feel like when you're young, you should try to be sort of the jack of all trades with sports and just throw yourself into like lots of different sports. I don't think there's necessarily I don't think that it necessarily leads to being a better athlete in one particular sport if you just focus on that from a very young age. And the cross training aspect, I think, is vital, particularly in a sport like rowing. I think that throughout lockdown, as we sort of discussed, I spent a lot of time cycling. I definitely think that cross training is really important to being able to I guess mix up the training and make sure that you're enjoying your training, and something that it's really hard to do when all you do is sit on the erg. There are definitely points where you'll sit there and you'll be like, oh, okay, wow, I've just got to go on the erg and do another 20k. Whilst if it's like, oh, well, actually, I can go get on a watt bike, or I can get on a road bike, and I can go out, or I can go for a run. I think that massively improves like the well-being of an athlete, and also has several like key other aspects to it. In particular, I think that in rowing, like obviously rowing is quite a big power to weight sport, an efficiency sport. So just like learning to carry your own weight, whether it be on the bike, going up hills, or like going for a run, I think is vitally important. And don't necessarily subscribe to just like, sitting. I think that's like an error that a lot of people make, is it's like the only way I can get better is by sitting on the erg and just like grinding out Ks and Ks and Ks. And to some extent you do need to do that to some extent. But I think that throughout lockdown, I'd say that in terms of steady state on the erg, I was actually doing like very little relative to other guys on the team, because I was choosing to go and ride my bike or go for a run on those steady state sessions. And I think that every time we had pieces or UT1 pieces or and above like intensity, I'd do it on the erg, obviously, and that was like the main aspect of the training. And that's obviously, we're very fortunate in rowing to have a very sport specific land training system. But I do think that it was really good for me as an individual, and I think it's great. And I think I've had a lot of the same feedback from other guys on the team during this time. It's been really good to be able to mix up that training and use cross training. So I'd say that kind of plays in as well to the sort of, when should a child specialize on one sport? I'd say not too early, probably like ideally I'd say not before you're 16, but ideally actually once you get to the university age. I think that you should be, there's nothing stopping you from being a good rower if you don't row all year round when you're young, or a good rugby player, and so yeah.
Perfect. Let's I got one for you too, Tom, that we touched on earlier, but I want you to highlight it a little, because it's important for a lot of people to understand that all the training isn't always at high intensity. So talk about UT2, basically training around or under even your aerobic threshold. So we're talking about, for you, it's probably in that 140 range, 150. How much training do you do in UT2, and why is it important?
The bulk of the training is done in the UT2 band. And as you saw on the bike, I guess, like I'm sort of flicking in and out of it. But if I were to do an erg session, I'd just sit and make sure I know where my sort of UT2 band is, without really having to. I don't often like look at my heart rate whilst I'm on the erg itself. I just know the sort of splits now. I think it's important to do the UT2 work, because that's where you build your aerobic base, and ultimately you need that aerobic base to be able to then plunge into the anaerobic system and to be able to like fire up the anaerobic system efficiently.
100%.
Yeah, I think that the majority of our training as a team is done in the UT2.
And Tom, what kind of erg pieces are we talking about there? Are we talking 30 minutes, hour, longer?
Probably like I'd say that 20k was like a standard UT2 session on the erg throughout this lockdown period. So that's an hour and 12 minutes roughly.
Right.
Yeah.
Perfect. Okay, and this one's really great. I want to get to this. Matthew Dawson, thanks for the good question, buddy. He's saying, looking at going to uni in America from the UK, how were you, Tom, able to choose the right uni over there, find the rowing program, and what course did you do? And then, of course, he also says, and we touched on this, he says, how do you prepare for the 2K? But mental and physical, we got to that. So maybe the first part about uni and the rowing program at Princeton.
I guess I was really fortunate that I had a couple of programs in the States that I was talking to offer me the chance to visit the campuses. And so that's kind of the point at which you really are able to choose which university you want to go to. I'd say that choosing blind is never going to work out for you, because they're all so different, and there are certain aspects of them that I really liked, and there were certain aspects of other ones that I didn't like as much. So I think that I was being able to visit for this official visits, which are 3 days long. You do 2 nights on campus, like hang out with guys on the team. You get to know the guys you're going to be on a team with the next year. Was the thing that ultimately made me you helped me choose Princeton. What was the other part of the question? I was a politics major, so politics. Wrote my thesis on Brexit, which was interesting, quite fun, and obviously it's still evolving at the moment.
Cool. Let's do one from recovery, and then we'll wrap it up. Which do you like here? Best metrics. We've covered the metrics. I kind of like this number 2 because we all have to deal with this in training and in daily lives, and experiences that confront us that might make you feel not so great. So when you're feeling overwhelmed, fatigued, low energy, and I'm not sure what they mean about 1 to 3 hours post-workout, because that post-workout feeling is great. But what do you do? I guess for me, I'll rephrase. When you're not feeling great and you have to go get after something, whether it's a 20K or your long ride, or even a harder piece, are there any things, and this is actually good, I saw this from some guys recently on Instagram Live, some athletes. Do you have any mantras, Tom? Do you have any, you talked a little bit about the app, the meditation, but do you have any specific things that you go through to put yourself in that right place to go get after a session when you're not feeling that great?
I guess the ultimate motivation is to succeed at the Olympics next year. So I guess that ultimately, like whenever, and it's sort of perfectly natural, and it's sort of part of being a human being to have like fluctuations in motivation. And I think that there are definitely moments when you have those, but the ultimate motivation is to succeed at the Olympics next year. And I know that there are 7 other guys who I was going to be in an 8 with who are also having those fluctuations of motivation, and those guys we've all sort of held each other pretty accountable and created an environment in which we want to go and succeed for each other and for our coaches. So in that regard, I think that that's probably the way in which I most find that motivation. Is I sit there, you go down to the erg and like, I don't necessarily want to do this, but then you remember like all the other guys who are putting their sort of blood, sweat, and tears into it, and want to go out and succeed as well. Yeah,
perfect. So you're kind of always because you're in it so much. I mean, after all, you're 45 hours a week. That picture and that goal of the Olympic Games is always a reminder of, how am I going to make this day great? How am I going to make this session good? So you're not allowing yourself to dip too far away from what's most important and present in your life, which is I'm rowing every day. And I actually really like your point. You brought it up several times. The other guys pull you along. This is you're in a rowboat together. I mean, this is tunnel vision, baby. I mean, so I think for the person who asked the question, and a lot of people, think about a mantra that can keep you focused. What do you return to? And you said it, Tom, you return to the Olympic Games as the goal. So let's end on that, because that is just perfect. Thank you everybody who stayed for overtime, and all those who didn't, thank you as well. But Tom, especially big thanks to you, brother, because I know you're traveling and you're on break, but this was outstanding. And I what I'll say to you is we got to keep this going, keep the chatter going, keep the training going, keep the data going, and build and share these ideas with other people, because we can only lift one another if we do things like this kind of effort. So thank you so much for joining us, buddy, and I will speak to you soon. Any last thoughts for the group?
Yeah.
Okay.
I'd say just like make sure if you're out like training for like the younger guys, I know we've had a few young guys on here, just to like really enjoy it and make sure that every time you get on the water or you're training or whatever sport you're doing, is to make sure that you find the things that you enjoy and continue to do them to like as this sort of staple. And obviously there are going to be points at which you need to step outside your comfort zone, and I know that people have been asking about that quite a lot in the live chat. Is that people want to step outside at points you've got to step outside your comfort zone, but don't ever think that you need to only, especially early on in your rowing career, you need to continually be outside your comfort zone. Make sure you have those like anchors that you enjoy, that you're able to like come back to remind you why it is that you're doing that sport.